It starts with a phone that never rings in public. No hotline, no website, no interviews. Yet when it lights up, presidents cancel flights, ministers rewrite budgets, and central bankers stop sleeping. The name is never printed on ballots, but it shows up in the fine print of rescue deals, currency swaps, and technical assistance packages. People call it a bank. That is the polite word. In reality, it is a switchboard for national survival. Tonight, we are telling the untold story of the institution that does not invade countries with soldiers. It moves numbers. And nations move with them. Our story follows Leila Okoye, a financial crimes analyst who measures lies for a living. She works in London, mostly on boring cases, false invoices, shell companies, directors who forgot to file accounts. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday, a courier drops a plain envelope at her office reception. No sender. No stamp. Just a single phrase typed on a strip of paper: "The bank that controls nations is not a myth." Inside is a USB drive and a date. Tomorrow, 6:30 a.m. A second strip reads, "Bring coffee. Bring doubt. Do not bring colleagues." Leila does what careful people do when they are curious and scared. She makes copies. She opens the files on an isolated laptop. The first folder is titled Clearing, and it contains spreadsheets that look too clean to be stolen. The second is titled Minutes, and the documents read like board notes, except the clients are not companies. They are countries. Client, Republic of Gallia. Client, North Meris Monetary Authority. Client, Kivu Stabilization Facility. Each line has a number next to it, not a price but a limit, like a leash. Leila whispers the obvious question to an empty room: who has clients that are nations? At 6:30 a.m. the next day, she sits in a cafe near Liverpool Street Station. A man arrives 5 minutes late and orders tea like he is trying not to be noticed. He looks like the type of person whose job is to remember and never be remembered. "Call me Tom," he says, then slides a folded newspaper across the table. There is no news inside, only a handwritten diagram. A circle labeled "The House." Lines run outward to central banks, sovereign wealth funds, and commodity traders. At the bottom, one sentence: "Every nation is a balance sheet if you know where to look." Tom explains without drama, like he is reciting weather. "The House is a private clearing bank," he says. "It does not take retail deposits. It does not advertise. It exists to settle obligations between major institutions, especially when politics makes direct settlement impossible." Leila keeps her face neutral. "So it's a backroom payment system." Tom nods. And because it sits in the middle, it sees who owes what, who is late, who is lying about reserves, and who needs emergency dollars by Friday. When you see everything, you can price everything. When you can price everything, you can control outcomes. He tells her the house has a real name, but saying it is like saying an undercover officer's identity out loud. People pretend it does not exist because the alternative is admitting the world runs on private plumbing. He says it started during a currency crisis decades ago, when sanctions, capital controls, and diplomatic pride made ordinary banking too slow. Governments needed a neutral corridor, Tom says, so they used a bank that could be deniable. The house learned fast. It built relationships with everyone, allies, enemies, and the people who profit from both. It became the place where contradictions get settled quietly. Leila asks the question she has been holding back. "Why tell me?" Tom's eyes flick to the window, then back. "Because it's about to move," he says. "And when it moves, the countries underneath it get dragged. Tomorrow there's a vote." Leila almost laughs. "A vote where?" Tom taps the diagram. "Inside the house. They call it a governance adjustment. In plain language, they are changing who gets liquidity when the next crisis hits. If you thought bailouts were political, wait until you see bailouts that are private." He stands to leave, then adds, "You have one advantage. You still think the rules matter." That night Leila rereads the minutes folder. The writing is calm, almost bored, and that is what scares her. A section titled Nation Risk lists countries like corporate subsidiaries. There are notes about election cycles as if they were quarterly earnings. One line stops her: adjust exposure to Galia contingent on cabinet reshuffle. Recommend corridor financing to ensure continuity. Continuity of what? Another line: delay settlement window for North Meris until port concessions formalized. Layla has investigated bribery before, but this is different. It is not bribery for a contract. It is leverage for sovereignty. The page does not ask permission. It sets terms. In a separate file, she finds a transcript labeled Archival, 1986, Private Dinner. A voice says, if they need dollars, they will behave. Another replies, they always need dollars. The laughter is soft. The third voice is colder, we are not forcing them. We are offering reality. Layla sits back. She thinks about how nations speak on television: pride, independence, destiny. Then she thinks about the words in these minutes: exposure, settlement, corridor. The language of pipes. You can shout at pipes. They still carry water where the valves allow. She realizes the house does not argue with countries. It adjusts flow. Layla does what she always does. She traces ownership. The house is hidden behind layers of trusts and nominee directors. But patterns exist. A law firm in Zurich appears repeatedly. A philanthropic foundation in Delaware holds voting shares. A family office in Singapore provides strategic counsel. None of this proves control, only camouflage. Then she finds the clue that changes the temperature of the room: a list of Tier 1 participants. It includes the largest global banks, yes, but also 2 central banks and 3 state-owned commodity traders. The house is not outside the system. It is the knot tying public and private power together, tight enough to hurt. The next morning the news shows a small country, Galia, announcing sudden austerity measures. People protest. The finance minister insists it is unavoidable. Layla watches the clip and compares it to the minutes. The timing matches. She pulls up another document, corridor terms, and sees numbers that mirror Galia's new budget cuts. It feels like watching a puppet move and then seeing the strings on your desk. She calls Tom from a burner phone. The house is running Galia, she says. Tom exhales like he expected it. Not running, he corrects. Steering. Running is messy. Steering is elegant. Tom offers to show her something in person, but only if she can follow rules. No recordings. No photos. No names spoken out loud. They meet in a bland office building that smells like carpet glue and compliance posters. Inside, a woman waits in a conference room with empty eyes and perfect posture. I'm Mara, she says, then immediately clarifies, not my real name. She doesn't threaten Layla. She explains the house as if teaching a new hire. We settle cross-border obligations at scale, Mara says. We reduce systemic risk. Layla notices what is missing. No mention of democracy. No mention of consent. Only risk, scale, settlement. Mara lays out a scenario. A nation's currency collapses. Imports become unaffordable. Fuel shortages hit within days. Hospitals run out of supplies. The government needs dollars, not speeches. Public institutions move slowly, Mara says. We move in hours. Layla challenges her. And the price is policy. Mara doesn't deny it. The price is credibility, she replies. We need assurance they will repay. That means reforms. Layla pushes harder. Reforms decided by who? Mara pauses just long enough to be honest. By whoever can supply the dollars. She says it like gravity. Layla feels a chill because it makes brutal sense. Mara then shows her the house's real weapon. Not money. Information. A dashboard of national cash flows, commodity shipments, and reserve positions that updates like a heartbeat monitor. We see the truth before anyone writes press releases, Mara says. We know when reserves are pledged twice, when gold is leased, when a sovereign fund is quietly selling. We know when the minister is lying because the settlement queues tell us. Layla understands immediately. In her world, a lie dies when evidence arrives. In this world, a lie becomes leverage. If you can prove a nation is weaker than it admits, you can extract terms before the truth becomes public. The House wins by arriving early. Layla asks about the vote Tom mentioned. Mara nods and slides over a one-page document. Liquidity Priority Framework, it reads. Tier A gets first access to emergency funding corridors. Tier B gets access later, at higher cost. Tier C gets case-by-case consideration. The countries in Tier C are mostly small, resource-rich, politically unstable. The page is clinical, but the effect is violent. It means in the next crisis, some governments will have oxygen masks, and others will be told to negotiate while they suffocate. Who decided these tiers? Layla asks. Mara points upward, as if the ceiling contains the answer. The board, she says. The world, she means. Layla leaves that building with the kind of anger that stays quiet. She doesn't want a scandal. She wants proof. Proof means tracing decisions to outcomes. She returns to the clearing folder and finds settlement records tied to a port concession in North Meris. The timestamps line up with a sudden change in the country's shipping laws. She finds another set tied to Kivu, where a presidential candidate unexpectedly drops out after health concerns. The settlement record shows a private debt payment that only makes sense if someone bought silence. Layla tells herself to be careful. These are inferences. But she has lived long enough in finance to know patterns are often the only confession you get. She decides to build a single story the public can understand. Not 30 countries, not 1,000 transactions. One thread, one human cost, one clear line from a private decision to a national consequence. She chooses Galia because it is small enough to see and fragile enough to be believable. She researches its history, a newly discovered gas field, a weak currency, rising food prices, an election approaching. She finds a line in the minutes, ensure continuity through cabinet-friendly stabilization. Cabinet-friendly. It sounds harmless until you translate it. Keep the right people in place. Keep contracts intact. Keep the nation compliant. In other words, the House is not just financing Galia. It is shaping who governs it. Layla reaches out to a journalist she trusts, a stubborn documentary producer named Simon who hates conspiracies but loves paperwork. She doesn't tell him everything. She gives him one document, sanitized, and asks him to verify it independently. Simon disappears for 3 days, then returns with his voice lower than usual. This is real, he says. I found the law firm, the foundation, the pattern of directors. Layla nods. Now we need a witness. Simon laughs without humor. Witnesses don't survive long around institutions like this. They get bought, frightened, or reassigned. Layla thinks of Tom and Mara. One is scared, one is proud. Maybe pride can be used like a crowbar. Layla calls Mara again and asks a simple question. Do you believe this is good? Mara doesn't answer immediately. I believe chaos is worse, she finally says. Layla presses. So you trade sovereignty for stability? Mara replies, sovereignty is a story governments tell voters. Stability is what keeps children alive. It is the best defense the House could have, and that's what makes it dangerous. Because it is not cartoon evil. It is rational. It is efficient. It is convinced. Layla offers Mara a deal. Talk to me on camera, she says, anonymous, voice altered. Explain your philosophy. Let the public decide if they want this. Mara's laugh is quiet. The public doesn't get to decide, she says. That is the point. Days later, Galia's currency drops again. The government blames speculators. Layla checks the settlement queues and sees the House tightening the corridor. The phrase delay settlement window appears, and she understands it like a punch. If you delay a nation's ability to pay for imports, you create shortages. If you create shortages, you create panic. If you create panic, you create political obedience. She remembers the archival line, if they need dollars, they will behave. It is not a joke. It is doctrine. Layla and Simon start filming interviews with diaspora groups, shipping analysts, former IMF staff, anyone who can explain the mechanics without naming the House. They build a documentary that feels like walking through a maze where each turn is a signature. Then the pressure arrives, right on schedule. Layla's landlord calls about unusual inquiries. Her bank asks her to update source of funds on a savings account she barely uses. A stranger follows her for 2 blocks, not threatening, just present. Simon receives an email from an unknown legal firm warning of defamation if he publishes false allegations about reputable institutions. The letter never names the house, but it lists details only the house would care about. The message is clear: we see you seeing us. Layla considers backing off. Then she remembers the dashboard showing who gets oxygen and who negotiates while drowning. She decides fear is part of the product. The house sells stability and buys silence with it. Tom reappears, unexpectedly, like a man who has been arguing with himself. He meets Layla at night near the Thames and speaks fast. "They're moving the vote forward," he says. "They think someone is leaking." Layla's heart rate spikes. "Are you the leak?" she asks. Tom shakes his head. "I was a messenger. Now I'm a target." He hands her a final file, smaller than the others. "This is the key," he says. "The list of nations and the exact triggers. When they cut you off. When they rescue you. And what they demand each time." Layla looks at the file name, Valves. She hates how perfect it is. "Why give this to me?" she asks. Tom's voice cracks. "Because I watched them break a country once. And everyone called it a necessary adjustment." Valves is not dramatic. It is worse. It is a playbook. Trigger: election volatility above threshold. Action: tighten corridor. Concession: revise mining royalties. Trigger: minister refusal. Action: settlement delay plus reputational flag. Concession: cabinet replacement. Each line reads like a technician's manual for a sovereign state. Layla and Simon verify pieces where they can. They cross-reference shipping data, parliamentary votes, and sudden policy shifts. The pattern holds. It is not perfect control, but it doesn't need to be. You don't need to control a nation completely. You only need to control its worst week. That is when leaders beg. That is when signatures happen. The house lives for the weak a nation cannot endure. The documentary takes shape, but Layla refuses to turn it into a fantasy. She keeps the story tight. One fictional institution, one country, one corridor, one sequence of consequences. She narrates over simple visuals: a ship waiting offshore, a currency exchange board flashing red, a hospital pharmacist counting dwindling supplies, a finance ministry drafting emergency reforms. She uses short quotes from the archival transcript and pairs them with dry financial terms. Promise versus plumbing. On camera, she says, when a private institution becomes the corridor for national survival, it becomes more than a bank. It becomes a governor. Simon titles the cut, "The House That Settles Nations." They know the title will draw attention, and attention is the only shield they have left. 2 days before release, Mara requests a meeting. She chooses a bright public place, a museum cafe, the kind of location where violence would be inconvenient. She sits across from Layla and looks tired for the first time. "You don't understand what you're doing," Mara says. Layla replies, "I understand exactly. You are making choices for people who never voted for you." Mara leans in. "And you think politicians do?" she asks. "At least politicians can be removed," Layla says. Mara's expression hardens. "Remove us and you get chaos," she replies. Layla pauses, then asks the most important question, "Or do you get accountability?" Mara doesn't answer. Silence is an answer too. Mara finally offers a confession that is not the kind you can print as a headline. "The house doesn't control nations," she says. "It controls timing. The world runs on timing. Miss payroll. Miss fuel deliveries. Miss debt payments. Miss confidence. Nations collapse through schedule, not speeches." Layla listens, because this is the truth hiding inside the arrogance. Mara continues, "When a country is stable, it can negotiate. When it is desperate, it signs." Layla asks, "So you manufacture desperation?" Mara flinches, just slightly. We manage risk, she says. Layla replies, risk for who? Mara looks away. For everyone, she insists, but it sounds like a plea now, not a principle. Layla and Simon release the documentary anyway. They do not name real institutions. They do not accuse specific living individuals. They show mechanics, documents, and a fictionalized case that mirrors reality. Within hours, the response splits cleanly. Some viewers call it paranoia. Others say it explains everything they have lived through. Economists argue on panels. Politicians demand investigations, mostly for the camera. Meanwhile, something quieter happens. Traders start using the documentary's concepts. Journalists start asking new questions. Which corridor funded this bailout? Who benefited from the settlement delay? Why did policy change 2 days after liquidity arrived? The house hates sunlight not because it burns. It complicates. Once people understand the valves, they stop praising the pipes. The blowback is swift but careful. No arrests. No dramatic raids. Instead, the house does what it always does. It adjusts flow. Layla's bank account gets reviewed. Simon's production insurance is reassessed. A distributor mysteriously backs out. It is soft pressure, the kind that keeps hands clean. Layla realizes the house doesn't need violence to punish. It can make life slow. It can make paperwork endless. It can make doors close politely. She thinks about Galia and laughs, bitterly. Even here, in London, the system speaks the same language. Delay, review, deny, reprice. That is what power looks like when it wears a suit and calls itself prudence. Weeks pass. Galia's government survives, barely, but the reforms go through. Port concessions are signed. Mining royalties change. A new independent central bank governor is appointed, trained abroad, praised for professionalism. The newspapers call it modernization. Layla watches the announcements and feels the weight of what she learned. The house didn't need to pick a president. It picked the policy environment. It didn't need to overthrow a government. It made governing conditional. And that is the most modern form of control. Not tanks. Terms. Not occupation. Corridors. The documentary didn't stop it, not yet. But it shifted one thing that matters. It gave ordinary people a vocabulary for invisible power. In the final shot, Layla stands outside a nondescript building and speaks like she's talking to someone who still believes the official story. The house will deny everything, she says. And technically, they will be right. They don't write laws. They don't pass budgets. They don't campaign. They just decide who gets oxygen first when the air runs out. She looks into the camera and lowers her voice. If you want to understand the modern world, stop asking who is in charge. Ask who settles the payments when politics fails. Ask who controls the weaker nation cannot survive. That is where the real government lives. Then she turns away, and the street keeps moving, as if nothing was said. That is the scariest part. The machine doesn't need belief. It only needs silence.